welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to the statement that has come out from Israel during the 53rd session of the UNHRC in Geneva, which has accused Pakistan of human rights violence against peaceful protesters, suppressing religious minorities, and enforced disappearances. And a statement coming in, of course, from a country like Israel is quite troublesome and concerning for Pakistan, in which, of course, the Foreign Office has responded and denied any such claims and has called out on Israel to stay out of Pakistan's internal political matters. Of course, this is something that is an extremely important discussion point, especially when it comes to the human rights violations and abuses at the hands of Israeli occupation forces against Palestinians, which is all the more important and has been going on for quite some time. And despite that, it seems that there is some sort of impunity that the Israeli occupation forces enjoy on this particular matter. And then to call on another country which has been commended for its human rights actions is something which is quite alarming. But of course, it needs the world's attention as well. And this is important, especially coming in at a platform such as the UNHRC, which is an important area for countries around the world to focus on human rights abuses and violations around the world. And so we were going to take a look at this particular issue and to take that in context of the history of human rights violation against Palestine by the Israeli occupation forces, particularly, of course, also many in terms of the recent violations that have also been going on, which the Prime Minister has also called out on his Twitter and has talked about, saying that this is something which unfortunately has been met by global silence, which has encouraged the Israeli occupation forces. And so without any care for the consequences, what Israel is doing is something that constitutes war crimes for all practical purposes. And we're going to be focusing on all of that in further detail in our first segment of the show today. Our next segment is going to be taking a look at a very important day, which is World Population Day, which falls today on the 11th of July. And this year's theme is Unleashing the Power of Gender Equality, uplifting the voices of women and girls to unlock our world's infinite possibilities. This is, of course, important, especially when we take a look at the issue of population in line with gender equality. And then we're going to also focus with reference to Pakistan's context as to what that means and how exactly will that be improved, moving, of course, to maternity care, health care for the mother and child, and then, of course, fertility rates in the country, and then the cultural norms surrounding issues such as family planning as well, which is important in terms of the context of population, but also in terms of providing women the equal opportunity that they deserve and have the right to. And so we're going to explore that in further detail in terms of the efforts that have been continuing in this regard, what challenges and loopholes still remain that need to be challenged, and how is that going to be put into context according to the international narratives around world population. That will be the focus of our second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Patafi, and for our first segment, we've been joined online by Mr. Johar Salim, former Foreign Secretary. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Johar Salim. Then I'll start with you. Of course, this is an important issue and an important platform for any country around the world. And for Pakistan, of course, it's important for us to move ahead, and we take human rights violations in the country very, very seriously. But given the statement coming in from a country such as Israel, and given its history of abuse and human rights violations against Palestine, and what its Israeli occupation forces have done, have been called war crimes, of course, by the Prime Minister previously as well. And this is what Pakistan's stance has been. But we unfortunately have seen that there is silence on the matter, that there is not much in terms of consequence that the Israeli occupation forces or the state also needs to deal with. And so what do you think in that context, this particular statement coming in from Israel has any value in the eyes of the international arena and the platform in itself? And then, of course, Pakistan has denied this, but how does Pakistan move forward in terms of its relationship with other countries around the world, given the value that the statement is going to be given?
Well, in terms of context, you have yourself mentioned that this statement was made at the HRC meeting. And this is during the Universal Periodic Review or report, UPR. And in those proceedings, many countries make statements. And in fact, an overwhelming majority of the countries present there, country representatives present there at that particular meeting, they made statements supportive of Pakistan. Israel was one of the exceptions. Now, this statement perhaps comes as a reprisal for a condemnation made by Pakistan some days ago. We all know that Israelis conducted raids, air raids, um, at the Jenin refugee camp, killing about 12 Palestinians uh, and maiming many. So after that, Pakistan made a very strong um, condemnatory statement. And this is perhaps as a reprisal for that from Israel. And interestingly enough, something very similar to this happened in 1921 as well, when Pakistan made a statement supporting the adoption of a resolution by HRC, a resolution which was sponsored by OIC, and Pakistan, on behalf of OIC, sponsored that resolution. And after that, there was this, Israelis criticized Pakistan's human rights record using the term hypocrisy. So this has happened again, this times in a more vociferous terms, in more vociferous terms. But it's a classic case of pot calling the kettle black, because Israel's record of oppression of Palestinians is perhaps one of the most uh, criticized records. In fact, in the UN history, Israel has been the most criticized country because of its human rights record. On an average year, on any particular year, on an average, there are 4 or 5 resolutions um, against Israel in the HRC, in the UN. Um, so basically, on the other hand, Pakistan has been elected multiple times to the HRC Council, including for this term 21-23. So there's a huge difference in terms of Pakistan's um, perception um, in the area of human rights within the UN, and Israel's perception in terms of human rights protection within the UN. Israel, in many ways, has perhaps the most criticized record, as I've said. Now, the terms used by Israelis in the statement made by their deputy permanent representative there, they said um, they talked about enforced disappearances. They talked about um, the right to political assembly. They talked about the capital punishment. They talked about protection of religious minorities. They talked about gay rights or same-sex um, activities. So on all these counts, it's very hypocritical on Israel's part, because what they are practicing um, within their occupation zones have been sort of, it's not just an occupation, it has been more like an apartheid, uh, and widely condemned by the world, not just now or in recent years, but consistently over the years. And Pakistan has been applauded. In fact, in this particular meeting as well, Pakistan was commended in terms of the improvements made in its human rights protection regime in many, many areas. Um, and in this report, the report on Pakistan, was unanimously adopted in that particular session. So I think in this whole context, Israeli criticism is nothing more than hollow words and cannot be taken seriously by the world, because its own credentials on human rights protection are so uh, so um, indefendible. Um, that they have no right to criticize other countries when they are when they are carrying out egregious human rights violations in the occupation zones um, under their control. And in fact, Pakistan has been very consistent in calling upon Israel, um, first of all, for stopping those human rights violations, those consistent and heinous human rights violations, but also in terms of Pakistan's position on um, giving the Palestinians the right to an independent state um, within the internationally accepted perimeters and as per the pre 1967 borders. That has been very consistently made and very categorically reiterated. Um, so naturally, that is not appreciated by Israelis, and they would take every opportunity, and this was an opportunity for them. The representative was there, and the statement they made trying to um, exploit the, that particular venue, trying to exploit the fact that this was the periodic report on Pakistan, which actually is, it's not just for Pakistan. It sort of, like, this is for many UN member states, and it's a normal procedure. So this statement could only be termed as a very as coming from a frustrated mindset and coming from a quarter which has no credibility in this particular area.
Farooq, that's important. Of course, we have an understanding of what Israel is trying to do or where it's coming from, as pointed out by Johar Saab as well. But I also want to further then understand, in response to these statements, in response to what is going on within Israel, Johar Saab is claiming that it is still the most criticized, and there is a lot of condemnation that comes in from international quarters, and there's a lot of appreciation coming in towards efforts made by Pakistan. And I understand that there may be so, and that's important in terms of this platform and of course where we stand. But in real terms, we still don't see any actual benefit towards the people of Palestine who are suffering at the hands of the Israeli occupation forces. We don't really see any sort of actual consequence at Israel that is stopping Israel or creating hindrances or challenges in their way of actually carrying out these violations. So in that sense, what strength is gained from such platforms criticizing Israel?
All right, Sana, and that is quite fascinating an area that one actually really has to deliberate a lot before discussing. And I was listening to Johar Saab, and I thought that he stole my words. I was going to say cattle meat pot, right? At this moment, their own country, Israel's own record is abysmal. It's horrible, horrendous, and we have seen that they have been actually in attacking Gaza, they have been demolishing plazas that actually housed journalists over there, right? And it has repeatedly happened. Similar kind of situations took place as well. But remember, it is also Israel, whether you treat Israel as a state or as a nation, it also actually reminds you how when people think that there is a good idea and they try to actually enforce it or implement it, it goes awry, and then it becomes a weapon in the hands of fascists. Remember that the founders of Israel all were leftists. Golda Meir, others, they essentially came from the left, and they thought that they are going to create a kind of egalitarian state where they will be taking care of their own people. And frankly, the idea for the displaced Jewish people is nothing that one cannot understand. But then there is a documentary called Occupation of American Mind, and in that, again, it is made by leftist intellectuals, and they show you how Israel has been actually killing the Palestinian identity and crushing them. And Palestine used to be, and particularly Gaza used to be a very clear demarcated place, and it was a big one, and gradually they kept on settling there, and they have taken most of the land away from the people to whom it belonged. Similarly, in West Bank also, you keep on seeing what exactly happened. So there is a mirror in that documentary, and also how Israel operates internationally. Now, speaking of Israel's policies, one of the biggest heartbreaks, I think, is Benjamin Netanyahu, or Bibi Netanyahu as he's called. He is a man, a very talented man, a very smart man, and he is known to have defended his country in America when he was there. And despite that, he somehow chose his lot, through his lot, with the worst kind of religious fundamentalist. And there are many who believe that one of the assassinations of Israel's prime minister was at his instigation that actually propelled him into power. And Benjamin Netanyahu has been actually moving Israel away from its actual socialist point of view and gradually towards far and far right wing. And how does this happen, Sana? Because in countries like America, where this matters, they actually pay more attention to people who actually believe in hardline version of Christianity, evangelists, so to speak. Because evangelists eventually believe that Israel is like a pig that has to be fattened so that it can be slaughtered at the time of second coming of Jesus, right? With that kind of a mind, they don't care what happens when second coming comes. Right now, evangelists are one of the strongest supporters of Israel. But then there is this exchange between the two countries. Gradually, you keep on bringing them to such brutal nature. All Israelis actually take part in their army because they all are reservists and they have to actually mandatory participate in the army. And then we have seen pictures how Palestinians and even Arab Israelis are treated by those soldiers. Because of that, they are hardened. And then after Netanyahu actually started struggling regarding his corruption scandals, after that, every time scandal was going out of hand, they would start attacking Gaza and or Lebanon for that matter. And whenever they did, what would happen? You would see pictures of people sitting at the high mountains with their drinks and on sofas, as if they're watching some kind of cricket match, right, or some kind of hockey match. So this hardening of heart will continue, and this is exactly what is happening in India as well, because the idea that you are persecuted, I mean, in this documentary that I mentioned, one spin is amazing. You know, they kept on saying that Israeli soldiers have to kill innocent Palestinian protesters, and among them there are kids as well. So the spin that was offered, they were told to actually use, was that we can forgive Palestinians for killing us, but we cannot forgive them for sending their children to be killed by us. With that kind of point of view, now the entire world, especially because Benjamin or Bibi Netanyahu has actually returned to power with a hard right coalition, because of that, you know, the world has started calling out Israel as an apartheid state. And right now what happened, this exchange between Israel and Pakistan was what you call counter punching, right? When you think somebody is going to punch you, you try to actually counter punch them, and this is exactly what is happening. But regardless of that, Israel should first consider what is happening in their country. Why is it that even today 10,000 people were protesting in Jerusalem against the current government? And why is it that hundreds of millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people have been protesting over the past 6 months? And then they should realize what they did to those protesters before actually claiming that Pakistan also indulges in that. Remember, the number of missing Palestinians or Arab Israelis under Israeli tutelage is far bigger. And in Pakistan, there was enforced disappearance as a matter, but the total tally, 50,000 people are missing in America. There are other countries, India also, similar kind of tens of thousands. In Pakistan, the total number was 9,000. And because there was a commission that was created, that number has squeezed and come down to 1,000 or 2,000 max, right? And even now that commission is working to find other people and ensure that they are returned to their houses. So Pakistan is one country that is making an effort to actually come out of this fog of war and ensure that people are safe. One last thing, Sana, compared to Israel, Pakistan's record, whatever it is, keeps on improving, but Israeli attitude towards their own people, Remember, Arab Israelis are their own citizens. That attitude has never changed. And even now, they're instigated, they're victimized, they're made some kind of emblem
Yeah.
of hate and fear. And
Yeah,
that is how things
absolutely. Johar Saab, the situation, of course, calls for a serious action. But again, considering countries like Israel to actually reflect on that or take it seriously, maybe something that is actually not really happening, or is something that perhaps is beyond the expectation that we've had given the previous history. But in terms of what these platforms, as you were saying earlier, are doing or can possibly do, what else do you think can possibly be part of this agenda, much more so than criticism or resolutions, that can actually bring forward a change? Is there a specific action plan towards countries such as Israel and their human rights abuses that then need to be taken up by more and more countries, and the role that Pakistan can play in this regard? Because calling them out on social media platforms is, of course, one channel that's there, but in terms of creating actual change, what sort of impetus do you think needs to exist?
Well, first of all, they're being called in the international fora of United Nations, Human Rights Council as well, and OIC, many other international fora. But the fact is, as I often say, international politics is a very cruel thing. It's based on power equations, um, power realities, economic realities, and in all those facets, and also like who's supporting who, and whose interest lies with which country. So, in terms of that political dynamic or power dynamic, what we have seen is that Israel has been the most criticized country within the UN and perhaps other international fora as well over the years. But that has not really impacted um, in terms of any reflecting any change in its policies. Um, on the other hand, this is totally different to what we saw in the case of South Africa, for instance, when they had an apartheid regime. The international criticism, the international sanctions, the international boycotts, even, we would all remember that they couldn't even participate in any sports arena, including the Cricket World Cup. And they were only able to do that once their policies changed. But that type of pressure Israel has not faced and is not likely to face, to be honest, in any sort of any time in the foreseeable future, because Israel's support within the West is very clear, very obvious, and it is likely to be sustained. Um, in fact, if anything, in recent years, we have seen an increase in that support. So, yes, criticism, condemnation, particularly in the area of human rights violation, but where it actually matters, for instance, the settlements, the what is recognized by the world as illegal settlements have only increased over the years, um, and whatever hopes the world had for a peaceful resolution of the conflict within Israel through a two-state solution, through an independent um, Palestine within the internationally accepted perimeters and the pre-1967 borders. That doesn't seem to be happening. Um, so that is something that we have to um, recognize, that international politics does not work on the basis of values or ideals or in terms of morals or ethics. Um, I mean, they work in terms of the affinities of interest, the realities of shared interest, or vice versa, and the realities of power equation. And in that regard, Israel is perhaps um, seems to be rather in the safe zone.
Absolutely understand that. Thank you very much, Mr. Jawad Salim, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And Farooq, I know you want to add something to that, and also add to it the way that international media can be utilized or can be pushed towards making sure that whatever's going on within Palestine as well is something that is something that is coming to the attention of the public, and not just in terms of just sporadic episodes where we only see a certain aspects being highlighted and eventually something else takes over.
Right. Regarding media first, because international media is now badly broken. Because there are countries which call themselves democracies, including India, and they want media to actually treat them as an exception, and they don't want international press to actually indulge in human rights discussions regarding their records. India is doing that, and Israel, of course, has been actually investing a lot of money. Remember, Israel has a ministry that is called literally the propaganda ministry, right? With that kind of influence and capacity, they keep on influencing, and that will continue, and it is going to backfire, of course. But I wanted to actually draw your attention to what was said and how that is going to be read or misread in Pakistan. For example, they spoke about peaceful crackdown on peaceful protests, right, in Pakistan. Now, I was thinking which one could they be referring to, because there have been peaceful protests, but there hardly was any crackdown. So, which one comes to mind? Recently, the only one was not so peaceful, and it was from PTI, right? Now, the question then is, remember that lawmaker that came to this program and kept calling the chairman of PTI as the agent of India and Israel? A similar kind of worldview has existed in this country. So what they are doing is they are actually, killing anybody who might be actually protesting in Pakistan with a different point of view and might be aligning with PTI. So I hope it is not interpreted or misinterpreted that way. Now let us also talk about Benjamin Netanyahu's record in relations also. You have forget what they do to countries that have been more or less hostile towards Israel or Israel's idea. Let us talk about what they have done to the countries that have been their allies, right? Who is the most allied ally of Israel? That is America, right? Barack Obama, when he signed a JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, at that time, Netanyahu wanted to actually veto it. He was not extended invitation by the government of America or Obama administration to come and speak to the joint session of their Congress. But what did he do? Netanyahu actually ignored their reluctance and accepted an invitation that came from Republicans and went and spoke against whom? Obama himself, right? And then he actually supported Donald Trump like anything. Similarly, he also kept on supporting people like Nigel Farage in UK, who actually brought the demon of Brexit forward and then actually broke British system. Right now, UK is going through a recession, and that is primarily because of Brexit, primarily because of such character. So if you do this to your friends, what are you going to do with to your enemies, right?
Right.
And then you cannot lecture us. And one final thing regarding the overall situation, because Ambassador Saab was talking about two-state solution, and I totally get it. That UN has actually made some progress on that, and the US actually keeps on talking about it also. But if I push for a secular ethos in my country, I would actually do that also in Israel. And my point of view is the whole idea of Israel being an apartheid state is because Israel keeps on trying to become a religious state, right, a theocracy. The fact is that if you want to survive, you'll have to be a secular state. If you want to be that, you'll have to ensure that, if in the end, it might be one state solution like Lebanon, where Shias and Sunnis who kept on fighting and Christians share power in a formula. So if that doesn't happen, I don't know what exactly well.
All right, we'll move on to our next segment, which is going to take a look on World Population Day, that is today. And of course, the theme for this year, which is unleashing the power of gender equality, uplifting the voices of women and girls to unlock our world's infinite possibilities. For this, we've been joined by Fatma Razak, who's a gender rights activist. Thank you very much, Ms. Fatma, for being a part of the discussion today. And let me start with you with the complications with regards to linking both population and gender equality, particularly in terms of women's rights and choices in terms of options regarding reproduction and whatever it is that they want to live their life in the way that they want. In terms of whatever is required for countries who perhaps are dealing with overpopulation and other countries who are dealing with underpopulation, it's important for us to be able to understand how any of those issues can actually be solved without also stepping upon the inherent rights of women and their choices, and how exactly can these two then be reconciled?
Right. First, thank you so much for having me. I think when we're talking about population and gender, what's important to recognize is that Pakistan right now, in Pakistan's population, women and trans persons combined, like they're almost 50% of the population. The need for this theme, I think, across the world is because, despite having almost an equal number of women, Pakistan is one of the countries where, in terms of gender index and human development, it's very low. So it's one of the worst countries in the world. That means that there are some gaps that we're not identifying. And I think it's not just in terms of reproduction and reproductive rights as well. To address your question first, when you talk about reproductive rights, most of the times what we see in our society is that women are not given the choice, or they're overproducing. So it's not just about a woman's right to her body. What we advocate for is that there should be no external pressures. So, for example, one can say that it's a woman's choice if she wants to have more than one children, or two children, or five or six children. But even then, is that choice made in terms, is that a choice that is made independent of external pressures? Is there any social pressure that is telling her to give birth to a male son, or that is there any external pressure where then you need more hands on the fields, or someone, because of societal or cultural pressures, when they're added on to a woman, most of the times what we end up seeing is that that choice is at times not an independent choice. That's not a free choice. That choice is not basically something that is empowering the woman. That's just a facade to hide the intrinsic misogynistic values or problematic views that certain segments of the society might have with regards to gender. And I think this is not just this is a trend that we can see in many other areas in a society where gender equality is not the very best, in a society where
I
sexual
understand what you're
violence
saying.
or
I understand what you're saying, and it's important. But I want to link it with the issue of population as well and try to understand the two together. For example, in Pakistan, we still already are dealing with the issue of overpopulation, and the numbers in the future also point towards a huge increase in population. How exactly will that be addressed while at the same time making sure that women's rights are not something that is being infringed upon?
So I think you're absolutely right. And right now, the according to like the estimates, the growth of both genders, like Pakistan's population is going to double in the coming years. And as a society, we're not able to handle that much, that huge of a population increase. Talking about the solutions to that is, I think, like massive awareness that tells like that actually empowers women and tells them that it's not just about, they're not a child making factory. So all the choices about family planning, all the choices about choosing how many children they want, how many children a family can afford to raise up, and then again, the children who are being born, what is the quality of life that they are going to have? What about their schooling? So a lot of decisions about having a child or not having a child, I think, and the entire policy around family planning as well. I think most of it has to be centered around women's independent choice, and it has to be centered around the fact that we need to give our children a better environment to grow up in. So most of the times what happens is that there are a lot of societal pressures, and in those we think that family planning policies usually fail because either access to birth control is a huge taboo, or some fragments of the society do not want this sort of empowerment for women. So this conversation normally never happens in households. This sort of conversation never happens in husbands and wives, that how many children do they want, or how what is going to be the way forward. And I think at the national level as well, our own advocacy and policy around family planning, we need a holistic approach where religious messaging is also important. We've seen, like in the recent years, many of the messaging around addressing the taboos that family planning or thinking about your children or population control has nothing to do with hurting religious sentiments. So a lot of these misconceptions need to be cleared, and that is the only way how we will be able to empower the women, empower in fact all genders in a manner that our population would not be a ticking bomb for us, and we would have a better society in the coming years.
Right, absolutely. And Farooq, I want to explore that further, because issues of family planning and the cultural or religious taboos attached with them is something that Pakistan has been dealing with for quite some time now. And there have been many years ago that such campaigns had also been launched. And unfortunately, we're still talking about how we're going to tackle this in the future. If we're going to solely rely on this as a way forward in terms of a mindset change, or for people to be able to make the right choices for themselves eventually, which is going to be the greater good for the country, do you think that we have enough timeline for that to actually happen in terms of the urgency that the numbers regarding population growth are pointing towards?
Right, Sana, and that is quite an amazing aspect of this whole debate. But before that, I wanted to actually tell you that listening to two smart women actually exchanging views on women empowerment, and then that is its relationship to population. I was thinking that why am I sitting in this discussion? It could flow even more smoothly had all women been talking. And then I thought that perhaps the wrong Pitafi is sitting here. My 16-year-old daughter wrote a paper on women empowerment.
Oh, wow.
And I think that paper was so amazing that I thought that perhaps she should have a voice in these matters rather than I.
But we need men to have voices too, and yours is
but
important.
I wanted to, then this is my, get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
I looked at population, and then I said, look, now I can talk about this matter. Why is it that Pakistan keeps on limping in circles, Sana? Because our one leg doesn't work, right? Let me qualify that. Population in any country is usually 50-50. 50% men, 50% women, right? Give or take 1% to either side, or 2% for that matter. Because the, half of the population has been asked, as was pointed out by Fatma, to become, a factory of child production. That actually keeps on adding to poverty, right? If the women were also part of the workforce, and remember that rights will come when power comes, right? Power comes when you get money. If you are independently earning money, then you have some say in the workings of the household. I understand that there are places where still the motions of our dead traditions, and I call them dead because we evolved as an extension of Indian society, right? And their attitude towards women historically was very bad. Women were asked to actually burn themselves on the pyre when the husband died. Similarly, They could not say no, and there was no concept of divorce, especially if the woman is asking for it, right? So those traditions were we kept on carrying forward in the names of our tradition, in our family values. But the point is simple. If you want to ensure that women get their rights, make them financially empowered. And how do you do it? If you ask them, create opportunities for women, and then actually ensure that women get, the kind of gender equality at workplace also, then it becomes far easier. Because then what happens? Your society all of a sudden, instead of adding to the numbers of population, that is going to actually become a very bottom feeding, contributor to the economy. Then you actually invest in quality of life. And when you do that, and husband and wife actually, and by the way, I tell you something very interesting. I am third in my family, right, among my siblings. When I was growing up, there used to be an advertisement saying, "Bache do hi achhe,"
Absolutely. Yes.
right? And they used to say that only 2 children are good. And I used to think that the third one is bad. But when I married and we decided that there should be 2 children, the idea was that when you go out of this world, you leave behind equal number of contributing citizens as yourself, right? So 2 replaced by 2. Then population also stays controlled and things can move forward. So I'm hoping that in the coming days we create opportunities for women so that they invest in quality of life rather than just creating more human beings.
Absolutely. Fatma, there's also the issue of course, access to family planning or contraception. And there's,
Yes,
of course, there's the aspect of choice, but there's also the aspect of whether or not these women will have access to such facilities. And so this also points towards the kind of work that needs to be done in the entire healthcare system. What do you think are the major aspects that can be done, especially in terms of this access being provided to remote areas, and then also ensuring that this access is there in terms of any sort of natural disasters? We've seen that even last year, as part of the floods, there were a lot of issues that women particularly had to deal with, which was another layer of the challenge in itself.
Absolutely. I think family, the first and foremost is access of family planning. And, it's actually surprising. According to the latest data released by PBS, it says that most of the women, even in urban areas, are not using modern or traditional methods of contraception. Looking at the data, I was surprised that most of the times, even in our policy, we blame it on the rural women, or we say that it's only the rural areas where population growth rates are higher, and most of the messaging is always targeted at them. However, numbers say something different. They say that even in urban areas, contraception methods are not being used enough. That means that we need to address it. And I think like it's always about a holistic approach, where on one hand we need to provide many women access. I remember I was in Gilgit, and I remember many women actually asked me to bring something, some contraception there because they had run out of them. And many women actually bargain and trade contraceptives because there's no access to them, and using them is such a big taboo in many areas. So when one is access. Number 2 is, again, I would stress on it, changing the social and the behavioral change that we're talking about. And for that, messaging that, you just mentioned, like "Bacche do hi achhe," or any other culturally appropriate messaging. Now we don't see a dedicated effort to address the population growth or to somehow curtail it. That is absent. Third is about the economic empowerment and creating opportunities for women. And there's this term that we use for working women, that there's a gap uh, after childbirth in terms of opportunities. For example, we don't have maternity leave like according to the law we do. A recent amendment a couple of months ago now also ensures paternity leave as well. But many women many corporations or schools or different companies are not enforcing maternity leaves. So when a woman thinks that if she gives birth to a child, she's going to lose her job, in the end, the compromise is to lose the job. So there are a lot of problems when it comes to
Right,
ensuring
absolutely.
that we
And Fatma,
create a
I also want
society.
to, right, I also want to explore what Farooq was earlier saying in terms of the role that men can play. And I'm wondering whether the messaging previously or the target audience previously has been women, and perhaps that also needs to be shifted more towards what the men can do or what the men think, because a lot of the problems with choices or access to choice is something that is also emerging from that aspect. Do you think that has been done enough, or there's more that can be done in this regard?
Unfortunately, it hasn't been done enough. Either we blame the women for, giving birth to too many children, or for not giving birth to as many children as they should have, or for not being giving birth to a male child, or for giving birth to a female child. The messaging or the conversation about men's role is almost none. So I think it's absolutely, in fact, I'm really glad that Farooq is a part of this panel so that he can also talk about and maybe encourage men to have this conversation as well with their wives. Plan it. In many households, it's considered men usually alienate themselves out of these conversations, and either the woman's discussing with the mother-in-law uh, or like only women, and that creates basically a lot of you could say like disparity in the thinking, and even families are not on board. So what I said earlier, that every family needs to think in terms of their choices, in terms of their economic resources, how much they're earning, what what is the number of children that they should have in order to ensure that all of them get a full life. I see many of these conversations missing. And also, just a reminder that contraceptive measures or family planning has to be not only just used by women. These are products that also need to be used by the men. So if they refuse, or if they're not in on this, if they don't become a part of these conversations, it won't succeed. And we would always be pressuring one gender or blaming one
Right.
and not talking enough to the other.
Right, that's all we have time for, Fatma. But thank you so much for that insight and to be able to raise this issue. Farooq, anything very quickly that you'd like to add?
Yeah, two
Yes.
very quick factoids. Number one, regarding population growth in Pakistan. Last census took place in 2017. At that time, our population was said to be somewhere around 200 million. And now, after a few years, 5 years actually, there is another census, and the population stands at what? 250 million. 5 crore ka jump, right? With that kind of population growth, no country can actually take care of their people. And the second thing is regarding this religion being an impediment in the way of, I don't understand why is it that in every country, religion plays a force, a role
Right.
of force multiplier. It is only our country where it backfires. I think states should have more conversations with the religious lot and convince them that this is the way to go.
Right, absolutely. That's all that we have time for from the debate. And of course, these are important issues that still need to be discussed. Thank you, Farooq, for being a part of the show as always. That's all that we have. See you tomorrow.